And now, Max, I just want to remind you, we're talking about the Espionage Act and Julian Assange. So if you could try to keep it light. Try to keep it light. All right. As many jokes as you could possible. This is from Freedom of the Press Foundation. Obama used the Espionage Act to put a record number of reporters and sources in jail, and Trump could be even worse. Well, guess what? Biden's administration plans to continue to seek extradition of WikiLeaks Assange. He's even worse than President My Boss on this one because President My Boss, Barack Obama, decided to drop the charges against Julian Assange because they had concluded, his Justice Department had concluded that if we prosecute Julian Assange for leaking materials that was provided by Chelsea Manning, that we'd also have to prosecute the New York Times, which also published that information. And so they had to drop that. Well, Biden's not doing that. Isn't that something? Okay, well, President Joe Biden plans to continue to seek to extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from the UK to the United States to face hacking and conspiracy charges. Justice Department spokesman on Tuesday said the U.S. government will continue to challenge a British judge's ruling last month that Assange should not be extradited to the United States because of the risk he would commit suicide. Okay. Civil liberties group asked Biden's Justice Department to drop the Julian Assange case. A coalition of civil liberties and human rights groups urged the Biden administration to drop efforts to extradite the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and prosecute him, calling the Trump-era case against him a grave threat to press freedom, because it is. The Freedom of the Press Foundation organized the letter, and the other signers include the ACLU, Amnesty International, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Demand Progress, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Human Rights Watch, the Project of Government Oversight, and Reporters Without Borders. In other words, Julian Assange was doing his job. He was doing the job of a reporter. Most of the charges against Assange concern activities that are no different from those used by investigative journalists around the world every day, said the executive director of the Human Rights Watch. In other words, Julian Assange was doing journalism. He was doing, that's it. He was doing his job. President Biden should avoid setting a terrible precedent by criminalizing key tools of independent journalism that are essential for a healthy democracy. Yeah, you think? But we're actually... The Justice Department remains committed to appealing the denial of its request to extradite Mr. Assange, because we are committed to torturing journalists in the United States. What a great commitment to have. Too bad they're not committed to peace. Too bad they're not committed to the environment. This is a great way to spend their energy trying to frickin' kill a journalist. There he is. And Daniel Ellsberg tweeted out, I join all defenders of freedom. Now, Daniel Ellsberg was the one responsible for the Pentagon Papers. I join all defenders of freedom of the press in demanding that the Biden administration drop the unconstitutional indictment of Julian Assange and accept, not appeal, the decision of the British judge not to extradite him. Edward Snowden, Joe Biden told countries there'd be consequences if they granted him asylum. That's a true story. Joe Biden, and they threatened other countries, don't let, so they could have Edward Snowden go to Russia. They wanted him to be there so they could say, look, he's working with Putin. That's what that. And then so he told other countries there'd be consequences because he was supposed to go, I think, I forget where he was supposed to go. He was supposed to go to Spain, maybe. He was supposed to go somewhere else, Edward Snowden, and they stopped him because Joe Biden threatened those countries. And then Joe Biden threatened those countries to push-ups. I don't know if you know that. That's a true story. Former Vice President Joe Biden and then Secretary of State John Kerry pressured countries that protect whistleblowers and asylum seekers to deny Edward Snowden entrance. Snowden applied for asylum to countries such as France and Germany, but every time it got pulled. Why? Because Joe Biden and John Kerry. Nothing says, "Hey, world, the America is back," like a tour of Joe Biden and John Kerry. I mean, who's not stoked, am I right? So let me bring you in on this, Max. Now, you're an actual journalist, and Joe Biden, everybody made a big deal out of Donald Trump was an enemy of journalism because he was rude to Jim Acosta. But he, at the same time, he's trying to prosecute Julian Assange, but nobody was really making a stink out of that. It was all about Jim Acosta's feelings. And so what do you make of this?
Yeah. Well, John Kerry's on a private jet to Iceland to save the planet from climate change. So we're not hearing much from him about Assange either. And, you know, our State Department is freaking out about dissidents in Russia, like Alexei Navalny, but saying very little about Assange. The Biden administration really took the judge's ruling, Vanessa Breitzer in the UK, that Assange would be a suicide risk if extradited to America's maximum security supermax prisons like Terre Haute, Indiana, or this one in Colorado, where he would be in a windowless cell for 23 hours a day. And he is already suffering immensely in Belmarsh in the UK. And the Biden administration just shrugged, ignored it, and said, we are going to continue to try to extradite someone who's not even an American citizen. And one important thing to note here is that the Biden Justice Department is not fully coherent right now. So it was really nice to see all of those human rights groups finally step up when they spent like Human Rights Watch and like its permanent leader for life, Ken Roth, spent the last like 4 or 5 years hyping up Juan Guaido and like lay up all these like fake dissidents in Venezuela and countries he wanted to topple. He finally put in a good word for Assange. It was really nice to see them come together and do this. It was very helpful. But this isn't the end, because the Biden administration does not have an attorney general, and it's nominated Merrick Garland. I don't know if you remember. This was the guy that Barack Obama put up for Supreme Court justice when he wanted to not have a Democrat on the Supreme Court and wanted to like not do anything, while Trump just like rammed like, one frat boy after another through and just like wanted to win by one vote by any means. But so Merrick Garland was the guy Obama put up because he wanted to frame the Republicans for delaying a vote on someone who was actually kind of a center-right justice. He was definitely a law and order
Merrick Garland,
judge.
You mean Merrick Garland? Yeah.
But one area where Merrick Garland's been pretty good is on the issue of free speech. He's issued some very strong free speech rulings over the years as a federal judge. And I think if he's approved, and I expect him to be, I mean, if Neera Tanden can get in, then like pretty much anyone can. But if he's confirmed, then the question becomes, does the Biden administration believe in the First Amendment? Does it believe in press freedom? If it seeks to extradite Julian Assange, then we can clearly and conclusively say the Biden administration opposes a free press. And you have all these mainstream human rights groups and press freedom groups and the New York Times now calling for him to not be extradited and to be released. So that will be a really interesting conflict for the Biden administration once they get their Justice Department together. But now I think they're using the excuse of the fact that there are still Trump holdovers and they weren't really ready for this decision yet. I don't know how can they keep kicking the can down the road and just leaving him rotting in this COVID-infested prison in London. It would be sick, but it would also just mean really the absolute end of the Constitution.
I agree. It's all happening right out in the open. That's the craziest thing. They're doing it right out in the open. They're not spying on journalists in secret. They're prosecuting a guy who everyone knows is a journalist doing journalism because they didn't like that he told the truth about the government's crimes. Julian Assange told the truth about the war crimes that the United States was committing in Iraq and the Middle East, and they want to kill him because of it. And they want to send a message to anybody else who's going to do that. This is what's going to happen to you. And they're doing it all out in the open.
It's about it's part of this wider atmosphere where the managers, the national security state, the political elite, the Beltway political class, they've completely lost confidence in themselves and their own ability to command the public's respect. They've lost any belief that they have any credibility. They know they have no credibility. So they're using coercion to maintain control. I mean, that's what the social media censorship is about. But that's also what making an example out of Julian Assange is about, because Assange did one of the most revolutionary acts in a generation, which is to expose the secrets of the national security state and provide them to the public for everyone to see what the U.S. was up to abroad. And it wasn't just the U.S., other countries as well, including Russia. And this was a revolutionary act of transparency and just pure national security journalism. And he's being, they're just, it's a medieval punishment. They can't crack down on all the reporters. They can't jail everybody who's doing this, but they can make an example of him. And that's what they're doing, because they've lost confidence in their ability to actually command the public's respect. That's what that's what all the freak out over January 6th is about in so many ways, that the Congress fears a large section of the public now. They feel like there's a large section of the public that's wild and out of control and has to be put in some kind of political cage. And it fears journalistic organizations as well. If I were to do another book now, if I had the time to do it, it would be called something like The Management of Democracy.
Yeah.
If you actually cross the red lines, the invisible red lines, then the First Amendment goes out the window. I mean, Americans don't know Julian Assange isn't even an American. He's an Australian citizen. And Australia, their foreign office is speaking up every day for Alexei Navalny, who is really the West's man in Russia. And they don't say a word about their own citizen. They say nothing. Sweden, they're doing nothing. They've done so little to drop the charges against Assange. And, when I went out to these rallies on the day of the decision of Judge Breitzer in the UK, in DC, first at the British Embassy and then at the Department of Justice. I mean, I was one of the only journalists out there. There were a lot of podcasters, people who, and then the podcasters, these are people who watch you. And, there weren't a lot of podcasters who I would identify with the kind of like red rose social democratic Jacobin left, who are basically a wing of the Democratic Party. These are people who are like politically unaffiliated. They were hard to pin down. And it was a motley crew of like 40 of us, but there were no journalists there to protest for Assange. There were no members of any NGO human rights groups there. These people really aren't putting their money where their mouth is. They're not actually getting out there and organizing for Assange. And these statements really aren't enough. They're not going to be enough. But this is the most important press freedom case of our time. This is the trial of the century. And it's going to be up to the Biden administration to determine whether the First Amendment matters or not. Same with those. What about those conservative cancel culture people, the Barry Weisses, who are always whining about, someone who supports apartheid Israel on campus, and then they get shouted down by a bunch of Palestinians whose grandparents were ethnically cleansed. And then they say, oh, they're trying to cancel me, the radical multiculturalists on campus. They never say anything for Assange. And that matters so much more than their ability to speak at the Commonwealth Club or whatever without being like mildly protested by their victims. So there's so much hypocrisy on display.
Yes. The Gray Zone. Everybody check out Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone. That's great. Now, why an A instead of an E, Gray Zone?
I don't know why we chose A, but I know that once the name kind of caught on, we captured the Google SEO, the search engine optimization, and there were no other gray zones out there. And there was a debate that we had about whether we should change our name. I actually wanted to call ourselves the Mockingbird, as a tribute to Operation Mockingbird. And it would have been such a tight name, but like there were all these restaurants in like Charleston, South Carolina called the Mockingbird, and there was a film called Mockingbird. So it really just came down to search engine optimization. And a funny thing happened since, our work has been getting a larger audience, which is that these right-wing think tanks have developed their own little like gray zone initiative, CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is an arms industry and U.S. government funded militaristic think tank in Washington that we've exposed. We actually exposed them for hosting a meeting on whether to militarily intervene in Venezuela. They started their own gray zone initiative. And so when you Google us, they're like challenging us for Google SEO. And I feel like it's like a deliberate attack.
Yeah. Well, you'll know for sure if they call their next operation the Jimmy Dore Show.
Yeah, or they just like change their name to Jimmy Dore.
Jimmy Dore.
JDIS or something.
It'll help them trend on Twitter. I'll tell you that.
No, it would be a big improvement for them.
Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.